Chapter 9. A Painful Discovery. Stepping out into that new land was like plunging into a pond of murky water. In moments I couldn't see the entrance to the cave anymore. All around me was thick grey fog. It felt like I was in my own world, a world that measured only 30 feet in either direction. I had no idea which way I was to go or where I was supposed to find this Boran that my father had told me about. There had been so many questions that I wanted to ask. Too much information was missing. The feelings of hopelessness and despair started to chip away at any courage that I received from the Sanjay. I knew that if I gave in to them, they would overwhelm me in an instant, and I couldn't let that happen. "Okay, what do I know?" I said out loud into the mist, hoping that maybe the sound of my voice would chase the negative thoughts away. I took inventory of what I was sure of. I knew that, for now, I was safe from Jack. I was in some sort of valley that was protected in some mysterious way. According to my father, somewhere in this valley was a giant named Boran. I knew that I was alone, and I knew that there was a stream nearby. Maybe if I followed the stream, it would eventually lead to a river or the sea, or possibly even be crossed by a bridge at some point. I didn't have much else to go on, and at least following the stream would ensure that I didn't go in circles. I could hear it murmuring off to my left, and I made my way towards it. It was quite eerie, walking in such a heavy mist. It was like I was in a 30-foot bubble, and as I walked, it would move with me, revealing new things as I moved forward, and discarding them as I passed. Huge trees would slowly become visible ahead of me, and then fade away moments later. At first it was quite startling. I thought that it was some immense creature approaching me, and I froze in my tracks. But I quickly realized it for what it was, and was able to proceed. The small creek materialized before me in a similar way. Soon I was standing beside it again. I looked to my left, to where the stream seemed to magically originate out of the mist. Then I looked to my right, where it disappeared again. I did not know what lay beyond what I could see. It could be danger, it could be nothing. But, knowing that this was my best hope for a plan, I shrugged off any misgivings, and turning to my right, started walking down the stream. What a strange and mysterious time that was. On one hand, I felt closed in and all alone. My entire world consisted of the mist and the stream. Besides my footsteps, the stream's gurgling voice was the only sound I could hear. On the other hand, I knew that the stream came from somewhere and went somewhere. It may have originated from some mountain lake, and was likely bolstered from the heavy precipitation in the air. Thirsty animals, if there were any, could find their sustenance all along its banks, which somehow made this a shared experience. It was also oddly refreshing to me. Even though I was moving, it felt like I was in limbo because very little changed visually. This gave my heart and soul a chance to be quiet, to heal. So much had happened in the past couple of days, and I had not had any time to process it. Of course, I couldn't change anything. I couldn't bring my father back or wake my mother up. I couldn't help Cam escape from the pit or know if Keel did. And I couldn't do anything about Jack. But the silence and the monotony at least allowed me to ponder each situation fully and to store it safely in my mind. I had followed the stream for a couple of hours when I decided to take a short break. I sat down and pulled some food out of the pack. As I looked at the stream, I began to think how nice it would be to take my shoes off and let my feet get some cool refreshment. This brought a wry smile to my face as I remembered how often Cam and I would do this very thing in the spur, partly out of the need for the refreshing and partly out of the desire to feel Cam's presence. I peeled off my shoes and waded into the stream. The coldness of the water caused me a quick intake of breath, but it didn't stop me. It wasn't a fast-moving stream, though I could feel the current around my knees. And while the smooth, round stones that made up the stream bed were loose beneath my feet, I could keep my balance with ease. It felt so good. I wandered up the stream a short ways and then turned around and headed back to my shoes and pack. I had just about reached them when I felt a sharp pain in the ball of my left foot, like I had been bitten by something. I let out a shriek as the pain sped up through my whole body. Instinctively, I pulled my foot out of the water. Drops of blood fell to the surface of the stream and were quickly whisked away into the oblivion created by the fog. Gingerly, I limped my way back to my things, careful to only put pressure on my left heel and keep my toes elevated. I sat down clumsily by my pack and pulled my left foot up to where I could see the damage. There was a deep cut about the length of my fingernail right in the center of my foot, just behind my toes. Its sharp sting hurt like crazy. Luckily, the cut was clean, but I set my foot carefully back in the water to wash it out even more. As I sat there, I looked back up to where the accident happened. I could see the bottom of the stream bed with its multitude of gray, white, and black rocks. Knowing that they were all smooth, I was very curious as to what could have sliced my foot. Slowly, my eyes panned back and forth and then, suddenly, stopped. I saw something that appeared out of sync with the rest of the surroundings. It was a thin, sharp point that rose out of the stream bed. Cautiously, I shuffled over so that I was directly in front of it and could better make out what it was. Because of the uniformity of its construction, I knew that it must be man-made. Looking around, I found a broken branch, peeled off a few twigs so that it was a single clean staff, and then stuck it into the stream to prod the object. It didn't move readily at first, but I was not about to give up. Despite the pain in my foot, I stepped back into the stream and began to dig around the object with my makeshift staff. Soon I was able to dislodge it from the stream bed. I jammed the staff under its sharp edge and levered it up. All at once it burst out of its confinement. It was a sword. I grabbed at the hilt and pulled it out of its rocky scabbard. Sitting back on the shore, I examined my prize. There were many words that I could have used to describe it at first glance: deadly, untarnished, magnificent. But the first word that came into my mind was beautiful. I had never seen anything so beautiful in all my life. The sword was intricately fashioned and masterfully wrought. I had held a few swords back in Corna, but never anything like this. It was about 3 feet in length, with a double-edged blade that tapered towards the point, still remarkably sharp. This was what had pierced my foot. The groove down the center of the blade was smooth and perfectly formed. I could understand why it was sometimes mistakenly called the blood groove, as I imagined blood flowing down the blade like the stream that flowed past me. The grip seemed to be made of leather, but not like any leather I had ever encountered. Normally, leather needs moisture to keep it from getting brittle, but too much moisture would cause the fibers to swell and destroy it. Obviously, that should have been the case with the sword since it had been submerged in the stream, but it wasn't. The leather was still firm and supple. At first glance, it looked black, but as the warmth of my hand heated it, it began to change in appearance. Blues and golds and purples and greens began to swim across its surface like oil on water. I was mesmerized by the ever-changing pattern and could not figure out how it was done. The crossguard separating the grip from the blade looked like 2 birds' heads, their powerful beaks pointing away from each other and their beady eyes made up dark jewels. The crossguard separating the grip from the blade looked like 2 birds' heads, their powerful beaks pointing away from each other and their beady eyes made up of dark jewels. Across the middle of the guard was an ancient script that I could not decipher. The pommel of the sword was a deep, dark gem with a single letter on it of the same script that was engraved on the guard. It was perfectly balanced. I held it up vertically before me and tapped the pommel. The blade vibrated gently, except for about 3 inches up from the hilt, and there was a sweet hum emitting from it. I pulled a shirt from my pack and used the sword to cut a length off one of the sleeves. Using that piece, I wrapped the end of my foot to protect the cut and then pulled my shoes back on. With the rest of the shirt, I carefully wrapped the blade of the sword and tied it to my pack. Who knows, maybe I would have to use it someday. At least, I reasoned, if I did come across some civilization and had to barter for food or supplies, I now had something of value to trade. Moving a bit slower now and with significantly more pain, I recommenced my walking, or rather limping, alongside the stream. Where did the sword come from? Whose was it? How long had it been in the stream? These thoughts occupied my mind as I continued on my quest. I couldn't imagine that something of such beauty was thrown away. Nor could I believe that it was just coincidence that I came across it in the mist. Something bigger was going on, something magical. The more I thought about the sword, the more I realized that I would never barter it away for anything. It had come to me on purpose. I discovered it amidst pain and was not about to let it go. I was so preoccupied with imagining all sorts of origins of the sword and reasons for its abandonment that when the bridge slowly appeared in the mist before me, I didn't register what it was until I was right on top of it. It was an arched crossing made of simply cut stone, each stone about the size of my torso. The only exception was the keystone. It was larger, and there was the face of a woman carved in it. The bridge spanned the stream, which had grown in width to about 12 feet across. A dirt road stretched in either direction away from the bridge. I was at a crossroad. I could go right down the dirt road, I could cross the bridge and head in the opposite direction, or I could continue down the stream. I had no map, no reason to choose one way over the other. My indecision momentarily kept me from proceeding. I looked back again at the face of the woman. She was beautiful. I tried to imagine who she was and why her visage was carved on this bridge. As I looked in her eyes, it seemed as if she was trying to tell me something. I was so astounded by the intensity I saw there that I half expected her to speak. But although her voice remained silent, something else happened that was equally as startling. When I had first looked at her, I could have sworn she was looking directly ahead up the stream. But now it was quite clear that her face had turned to the side and she was looking to her right. I blinked my eyes several times, but the image remained the same. She was looking in the direction of the opposite side of the stream. Astonished at what I witnessed, and having no other course to follow, I determined to take this as a sign and crossed the bridge to the far bank. The road that stretched before me was wide enough that a horse-drawn cart could easily make its way along it, and I proceeded to follow it into the fog. I had only gone 5 or 10 minutes when it hit me that I didn't know when I would find fresh water again. I had a couple canisters in my pack, and I could fill them with water from the stream. I made my way back along the road towards the stream. Very soon I could hear its familiar babble, and I knew that I hadn't lost too much time. It appeared before me out of the mist like a large snake slithering through the grass, but, to my amazement, I could see no bridge. Confused, I looked up and down the course of the stream. Could I have missed it somehow? No, of course not. The road led away from the bridge. Now that road just emptied into the stream. In fact, there was no indication that a bridge had ever stood there. There were no divots in the banks, no cut stones, no keystone, nothing. I was baffled. I stood there for a while trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but soon realized that I couldn't. Instead, with furrowed brow, I knelt down and filled the canisters with water. Having done so, I looked once more up and down the stream, and after shaking my head in bewilderment, I headed back down the road, away from the stream. This was no ordinary land, I thought to myself. Unnaturally thick mists, strange swords, disappearing bridges. What else was I going to discover? Well, I suppose the good news was that I didn't have long to wait. I hadn't walked more than an hour when it happened. The mist had grown so heavy now that my visibility had been reduced to less than 10 feet. I had grown used to the ethereal shapes of trees suddenly appearing out of the mist. Sometimes they looked like huge men with grotesquely shaped bodies. Other times they looked like tall, slender towers that had suffered damage from some ancient siege. Always they turned into nothing but old, gnarled trees. So when the huge, monolithic shape appeared out of the gloom, I barely took notice of it. That is, until it reached out with its mighty arms, grabbed me by the scruff of my neck, and shook me so hard that everything, my pack, my sword, and even one of my shoes, clattered to the ground. I was so surprised I couldn't even speak. The fact that my windpipe was almost completely blocked by the massive fist didn't help either. The creature didn't say a word. It just kept shaking me. I tried to call out, to beg it to stop, but I was quickly feeling lightheaded due to a lack of air. The last sight I had before I blacked out was of a large, open mouth revealing several crooked teeth and letting out an enormous bellow that rattled me to the very core of my being.